Kubla Khan by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Kubla Khan, or A Vision in a Dream, a Fragment, is a poem written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, completed in 1797 and published in 1816. According to Coleridge's preface to Kubla Khan, the poem was composed one night after he experienced an opium-influenced dream after reading a work describing Xanadu, the summer palace of the Mongol ruler and emperor of China, Kublai Khan. Upon waking, he set about writing lines of poetry that came to him from the dream until he was interrupted by a person from Porlock. The poem could not be completed according to its original 200 to 300 line plan, as the interruption caused him to forget the lines. He left it unpublished and kept it for private readings for his friends until 1816, when, at the prompting of Lord Byron, it was published. The poem is vastly different in style from other poems written by Coleridge. The first stanza of the poem describes Khan's pleasure dome built alongside a sacred river fed by a powerful fountain. The second stanza of the poem is the narrator's response to the power and effects of an Abyssinian maid's song, which enraptures him but leaves him unable to act on her inspiration unless he could hear her once again. Together, they form a comparison of creative power that does not work with nature and creative power that is harmonious with nature. The third and final stanza shifts to a first-person perspective of the speaker, detailing his sighting of a woman playing a dulcimer, and if he could revive her song, he could fill the pleasure dome with music. He concludes by describing a hypothetical audience's reaction to the song in the language of religious ecstasy. Some of Coleridge's contemporaries denounced the poem and questioned his story of its origin. It was not until years later that critics began to openly admire the poem. Most modern critics now view Kubla Khan as one of Coleridge's three great poems, along with The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Christabel. The poem is considered one of the most famous examples of Romanticism in English poetry and is one of the most frequently anthologized poems in the English language. A copy of the manuscript is a permanent exhibit at the British Library in London. The poem is divided into three irregular stanzas which move loosely between different times and places. The first stanza begins with a fanciful description of the origin of Kublai Khan's capital Xanadu, lines 1 and 2. It is described as being near the river Alf, which passes through caves before reaching a dark sea, lines 3 to 5. 10 miles of land were surrounded with fortified walls, lines 6 and 7, encompassing lush green gardens and forests, lines 8 to 11. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to men, down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers, were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. The second stanza describes a mysterious canyon, lines 12 to 16. A geyser erupted from the canyon, lines 17 to 19, throwing rubble into the air, lines 20 to 23, and forming the source of the sacred river Al, line 24. The river wandered through the woods, then reached the caves and dark sea described in the first stanza, lines 25 to 28. Kubla Khan, present for the eruption, heard a prophecy of war, lines 29 to 30. An indented section presents an image of the pleasure dome reflected on the water, surrounded by the sound of the geyser above ground and the river underground, lines 31 to 34. A final unindented couplet describes the dome again, lines 35 to 36. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cover, a savage place as holy and enchanted as ever beneath a waning moon was haunted by a woman wailing in her demon lover. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast, thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift, half intermitted burst, huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. And amid these dancing rocks, at once and ever, it flung up momently the sacred river. 5 miles meandering with mazy motion, through wood and dale the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to men, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And amid this tumult, Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. The third stanza shifts to the first person perspective of the poem's speaker. He once saw a woman in a vision playing a dulcimer, lines 37 to 41. If he could revive her song within himself, he says, he would revive the pleasure dome itself with music, lines 42 to 47. Those who heard would also see themselves there and cry out a warning, lines 48 to 49. Their warning concerns an alarming male figure, line 50. The stanza ends with instructions and a warning to carry out a ritual because he has consumed the food of paradise, lines 51 to 54. A damsel with a dulcimer, in a vision once I saw, it was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Could I revive with me her symphony and song? To such a deep delight it would win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware. His flashing eyes, his floating hair, weaves a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honey-dew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise.